Good morning. My name is Heidi Beirich, and I am the director of the Southern Poverty Law Center's Intelligence Project, which is the part of SPLC that tracks hate groups and extremists. I'm here this morning with my colleague Lecia Brooks.
Good morning, Heidi.
And we are going to talk today about a big report that the Southern Poverty Law Center has released this morning called Whose Heritage? And it's a report about Confederate monuments, symbols of the Confederacy, more than 1,700 of them that you'll find around the country. It's one of the only real censuses that exist of the presence of these kinds of monuments across the country, including 796 monuments and 99 schools and other information. So, Lecia, if you could explain for our audience this morning, what's the state of Confederate monuments across the U.S.? What have we found?
Well, Heidi, we did a report in 2016, Whose Heritage, and cataloged all of the Confederate monuments and memorials that were located across the country. Today, a lot of them still exist. Over 180 different Confederates or named memorials or monuments across this country. It's something that is very troubling to us, and even though we've seen a few come down, quite a few, about 100, there's still a lot more to be done.
So what kinds of monuments are out there, or what kinds of things recognizing the Confederacy exist?
Well, as I mentioned, there's over 180 different Confederates, men who fought to preserve and slavery, African American slavery in the United States. So there's that. There are memorials, there's schools, there's parks, there are military installations, there's cemeteries. There are just any number of ways that Confederates are honored, and I say honored, because that's what these memorials do. They don't just simply commemorate history or remember history, as people would have you believe, but they bestow a certain honor on people who fought to preserve slavery.
So, can you tell us a little bit about, why the Southern Poverty Law Center is putting this information out there? What has happened in the recent past that has sort of led to this change in the treatment of these monuments, frankly, to white supremacy?
Well, you of course, being the director of the Intelligence Project, know what happened in June of 2015 when Dylann Roof went into Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston and massacred 9 African Americans. Right after that massacre, there was a picture that went up, I believe you may have posted it, that showed Dylann Roof holding a Confederate flag in one hand and a gun in another hand. And that, I think, was really jarring for the country, even though we know that we see the Confederate flag everywhere, we see these memorials and monuments everywhere. It was a time that really caused people to pause and say, I don't think we should have this symbol. This symbol should not exist. This really is a symbol of hate. So it started a conversation across the country, and we saw South Carolina in particular, then Governor Haley took down the Confederate flag. And so the Southern Poverty Law Center, not within a year, began to catalog all the Confederate monuments and memorials across the country, because we wondered, how many do exist really, and what does this look like? There was no other data source that had that information, so we created the report Whose Heritage. So, as we said, we found that some people have taken them down. Over 41 schools are no longer named, thankfully, after so-called Confederate heroes. Some monuments and memorials have come down, but there's still quite a ways to go.
It is actually an astounding amount of, it's a geography basically of hate across the country, which is, and the fact that no one had cataloged it at all shows us just how much we haven't recognized, with our history. We haven't dealt with it. We haven't dealt with what the Confederacy meant, period.
Well, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, people are always saying, oh, you're erasing history. Why are you doing this? We need to, acknowledge history. But the difference in acknowledging history and honoring or commemorating people who fought to preserve the institution, the dehumanizing institution of enslavement, is just beyond the pale. So what the Southern Poverty Law Center is saying is that these monuments and memorials should not be in public space at all. We certainly understand that people want to keep them in cemeteries, you want to have them in history museums, you want to keep them in archives where some context can be added to these monuments. Most of these monuments, the vast majority of the monuments are to Robert E. Lee. He has the most, right? Coming in second would be Jeff Davis. But when you see these monuments, he's usually kind of raised up high on a horse. Imagine a little kid walking to the park or walking to the courthouse with his grandmother and looking up and thinking this person is someone to be honored, and there's no context whatsoever about it. So I think that's what the Southern Poverty Law Center's report is really helpful in pointing out that whose heritage or what history are we really sharing? The history is there, but there's no context whatsoever.
Yeah, well, I think one of the other things that's really important about this report and the report that we did a couple years ago is most people, when they think of Confederate monuments, what they think to themselves is, okay, the war was fought, it ended in 1865, and they must have put the monuments up sort of shortly thereafter. But that, of course, is completely false. Yes. What happened was anytime black people asserted their civil rights in the post-Civil War era, that's when these things went up.
That's right.
So they're really, ultimately what these are is reminders to black people that
that's right.
white supremacy rules the land,
that's
whether
right.
it's the 20s Klan or during the Civil Rights Movement, right? And that, I think, makes it all the more important that we confront these things, document them, and frankly get rid of them.
No, I completely agree. And it's not even, black people didn't even have time to assert the civil rights right after Reconstruction, right? The South is establishing Jim Crow laws and reestablishing white supremacy, right? Or this notion of white supremacy, these reminders that, okay, you may be free, but white supremacy reigns in this country. And so, as you say, it appeared again during the modern American Civil Rights Movement. And then even today, Heidi, even as in the aftermath of our original report, we have states like Alabama where they're instituting legislation to protect these monuments. And we have a nearby county in Alabama that's going to erect a new one. It's ridiculous. It just shows you how far folks will go to maintain the system of white supremacy in this country.
Yeah, I often think on that front the most outrageous thing has to do with what happened in Georgia when they changed their flag some years ago and removed what was a part of the battle flag in the flag itself, and then immediately passed a law to protect monuments like Stone Mountain, sort of egregious Confederate monuments. And it's like, so what is the deal? What is the deal that you're drawing? Well, we'll remove this one Confederate symbol from the flag, but we're going to make sure the rest of this white supremacy stays up and stays in public view, and you can't take it down, right? And we're talking about the 2000s here.
I wonder, kind of, with the people who advocate, it's heritage, not hate. Do they think about kind of the other side of the coin, right? African Americans whose ancestors were enslaved. Or kind of held in enslavement by people like these so-called Confederate heroes. What is the message to them? What is the message to the grandmother who's going to court and has to pass by, one of these monuments or memorials on her way in? Again, as we said, it's just a reminder of white supremacy.
Yeah, at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how the report came together, like what sources of information we relied on to pull this thing together.
Well, I must say, after that first report, we were helped greatly by the public, and we encourage the public to be in touch with us again and let us know what we missed. We went to a number of public data sources and some private sources as well, and as I say, kind of reports that we received from people after the issuance of the first Whose Heritage report. We need the feedback from people. We want this to be accurate, and we've done all we can. It's been hard. I credit my colleagues for the work that they put into making sure that this was correct. It's important to note that some of the things, we're only looking at monuments and memorials that are on public space. And we're not looking at museums or markers, historical markers, which are huge across the South. We're not doing any of that. There's still thousands of those. We're just looking at things that are in public space.
So let's talk a little bit about specific examples in the report. If you were thinking about it, what do you find sort of the most egregious or the most problematic of the kinds of things that commemorate the Civil War?
You know, Heidi, I think the what's most troubling to me is that schools are named after, again, so-called Confederate heroes. How is it? There's a school in Montgomery, right here in Montgomery, you know, named Jeff Davis or Robert E. Lee High School. I mean, these schools primarily are 98% African American. And even if they weren't, I mean, the subliminal messages that students receive from attending a school that's named after a Confederate hero, again, it bestows this honor on them. And so even if they're not, you know, oftentimes students are not taught even kind of, you know, basic history, let alone the history of the name of their school. So they're thinking that, oh, Robert E. Lee, the generals, you know, we're good, we're good people. That's the most heartbreaking to me. I think it's important to point out that most of these, of course, are in the South, in the Deep South, but they're really all across the country. Well, I'm from California, and you are as well. And I was happy to see that as soon as our report came out, schools in California immediately changed their names. So I think that's probably the most hurtful. It also was interesting to note that these schools, the vast majority of them were named during the Civil Rights Movement, right? So again, to your point about this not existing kind of post-Civil War, schools named after so-called Confederate heroes during the Civil Rights Movement, right?
Yeah, well,
that makes no sense.
I think a lot of people don't realize as well that it was during that particular era when battle flags went up on most of the state houses in the South, and obviously what they were doing was saying no to school desegregation,
That's
right? No to Martin Luther King, no to equality, frankly.
That's right.
And there's this presumption on the part of a lot of people that these things have literally been around since 1865, and they're not. Mm-hmm. And I think the fact that most of the monuments were put up to remind black people that they don't have equality, or to help enforce it, basically, whether it's Jim Crow or something along those lines during Brown versus Board, is the thing that's the most damning about them. It's hard to imagine any other country, you think of like what's happened in Germany in the wake of the war, allowing the horrific ideas of a regime to just remain essentially in positions of triumph across the country, right? In Germany, they went through a real reconciliation period of thinking about the history, and the idea that you would see any kind of Nazi symbols anywhere is beyond the pale.
That's right.
And yet this country has never gone through that
and, you
process.
know, interestingly enough, Robert E. Lee himself said that the wounds of war should not be reopened, that the United States should follow the example of other nations and kind of rid the symbols of war. So you're exactly right. I mean, Germany is a perfect example in what we could do, what we can do to remember history and to remember it correctly, right? And learn from history.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Stone Mountain, because I think of all the monuments to the Confederacy, there's sort of nothing that even comes close to what's happened in Georgia. You know, when I fly into the Atlanta airport, I can see Stone Mountain and its carvings of 3 Confederate generals from the air. And I think a lot of people don't know what the history of Stone Mountain is.
No, you're right.
You know, and this is a monument that was Klan conceived. The first cross was burned on Stone Mountain. And it's now in the position, as in a lot of states like Alabama and Georgia, where it's protected in perpetuity by a law, which I find to be just absolutely egregious. I mean, there are millions of people who go through the Stone Mountain area every day, people of color, of course, also white folks, and are exposed to something that is the size of Mount Rushmore and probably don't know much about its history. And to me, you know, every time I think about that, every time I see that monument, I'm just shocked that a Klan monument can be sitting there like that.
That's right.
In public space.
And it's an attraction. Don't the school groups go there? Then kids go there. I mean, and we talk again about kind of remembering history. What history is taught when school groups are taken there for field trips?
I don't know. It is shocking to me that thing exists, period.
That reminds me, I know that the Intelligence Project talked about the number of flag rallies that were held kind of as people were beginning to talk about wanting to take down some of these memorials and take down the battle flag. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, in those months after Nikki Haley removed the battle flag from the grounds of South Carolina after the Dylann Roof shooting, there were, I think we documented more than 375 rallies involving literally thousands of people, mostly in the South, but not necessarily. They were all over the country, like in Washington State, I think, had one. And this sort of represented people who are refusing to accept the reality of this history, right? A lot of them have probably been schooled incorrectly. I mean, the fact of the matter is that in the South, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the group that was behind a lot of these monuments over the years, they were founded in the late 1800s, they used to also put together the textbooks that people read in the South. And it would whitewash what had happened in the Civil War. It wouldn't discuss slavery. They still have some of these sentiments on their website. And so you saw these expressions of people supporting the battle flag and I guess supporting the ideas of white supremacy all across the country, which to me was, once again, a shocking thing to see in 2015, 2016. And there is a movement, obviously. We have, more than 900 hate groups across this country that still exist in this country that finds itself on the side of the monument builders. So we shouldn't forget that when the violence happened in Charlottesville, the reason all those neo-Nazis and white supremacists came was to support a Robert E. Lee statue,
That's
right?
Exactly right?
That's why they were there.
It's I mean, that just goes unanswered, right, from the heritage, not hate people. The fact that hate group members, extremist leaders, always, not always, but typically are connected to the Confederate battle flag in some kind of way. They're just waving it.
Well, I mean, the hate group leaders know the history very well and support that history, right?
That's right.
They're on the side of the white Southerners who wanted to oppose, egregious human rights violations on the black population, right? And we still have many, many of those people today. So let me ask some questions about the things that have changed. Do you have any stories about some of the schools what happens in a community like New Orleans with the monuments being removed, or Memphis with Nathan Bedford Forrest statue gone, or the school changes that we've seen in the last few years since Dylann Roof?
There's some good stories and some bad stories. I think the good news came out of California, as I referenced earlier. As soon as the state people heard about it, it went pretty smoothly. It was fully accepted. We don't want to be named after kind of Confederate heroes, so that went well. But take an example like the Bedford statue, a leader of a Klan organization. When city folks, when community leaders made a move to remove that statue, to kind of remove it from public space, there was a backlash, and they're experiencing a backlash today. So you kind of have community people who are trying to kind of follow our lead and remove these monuments from public space. And then you have state legislatures, government officials, elected officials who are going behind them to try to kind of, change the will of the public. It's the most amazing thing. We see it in New Orleans. Then Mayor Landrieu gave a beautiful speech about why Confederate memorials should be taken down. And now we have a new mayor who's trying to kind of go around the way to figure out a way to bring them back. Maybe not necessarily in public space, but to still bring them back. Rather than, again, working with the community on moving the community forward and away from white supremacy, more to kind of an appreciation and inclusion of everyone, and telling an accurate history of everyone's history. So it's disconcerting, but I think that I would tell community folks or community activists to keep it up, because we are making some progress. As I mentioned, over 100 monuments and memorials have been removed. And let me just say to folks who think that the Southern Poverty Law Center doesn't advocate for the destruction of these monuments. We're not saying, tear them down, break them down, topple them over. Move them to a place, a more appropriate place. Move them to a museum. Move them to the state archives where they can be taught in context. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, I've found the situation with the mayor in New Orleans, the new mayor, quite troubling, because the situation is basically that the pro-Confederate types are being proposed to be given the statues.
Yes.
Right? They want to put them in someplace apparently near the freeway, so you'd be seeing all of them now in one spot as you drove in, with absolutely no context. And in Tennessee, right, there's a monuments protection bill being considered right now because of the controversy over the Nathan Bedford Forrest monument that was there in a park. So it's unfortunate to see basically reactionary thinking on this front, right?
And quick thinking. It happened here in Alabama. Then Governor Bentley gets a lot of credit for taking down a monument, in the dark at night, kind of because he feared that the people were going to demand it. But then at the same time, the legislature comes behind and institutes this new law that you can't take down it's essentially Confederate memorials around some kind of date that protects Confederate monuments and memorials. It's a shell game, it feels like.
So tell me a little bit about the community guide that we have here and the advice that we give to communities who want to go down the road of getting rid of some of these symbols.
Yes, well, along with the report, we've updated our community action guide, and what we're asking folks to do is to kind of follow our lead and catalog, see what's in your community based on our report, but then also add to it. And then begin to bring different community members together, people who want to remove these things from public space. And there's a guide on how to do that, how to work in collaboration and coalition with different folks in your community, how to contact the media, kind of other people, how to advocate to public officials. It's kind of a how to take down memorials and monuments that are in your community. And then don't forget to please let us know what you're doing so that we can keep up with it.
All right. Well, is there anything else in the report that you want to highlight that we maybe haven't talked about?
No, I'm really proud of this report, and I hope that it leads to many conversations around the title of the report, Whose Heritage?
Yeah, I have to say it's still astounding to me that there wasn't something like this that existed, that we have a geography that has these things all over the place, and no one took the time to document it or think about what the landscape looks like right as the result of the way the war was memorialized. All right, well, Whose Heritage, our new report, is online now at splcenter.org. Please share the report, read the report, and spread the word for everyone. And the Community Action Guide that Lecia was talking about, you can also find it there. Please contact us if you're interested in moving forward on something like that. If we can help, we'd very much like to. And let us know if we've missed monuments or different things. We really rely on the public to help us track these things. And thank you for listening.
Thank you.